Miracles. Do miracles still happen today? Have you personally experienced a miracle? Do you know someone who has? Can you pray that prayer of faith over others to see miracles happen for them? If so, God may have gifted you to some degree with the ability to help others believe in Him through miraculous events and to help some people gain their spiritual freedom. Welcome to episode number 19 of Unleashing Spirit Warriors, the show that is dedicated to sharing biblical truths and personal experiences in spiritual warfare and teach you how to be for Him, never against Him. Be sure to subscribe, like, share, and comment on this episode to help ensure that others can more easily hear that all-important message of spiritual freedom. When you leave your comments, I'd love to see your feedback on the new look for this podcast, what you learned on this episode, or just to share your experience with miracles in your own life and those around you. Feel free to leave questions. I'll do my best to answer them as soon as I can. In previous episodes, I talked about the first of the two power gifts, the gifts of healing and of faith. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the last of those three power gifts, the working of miracles. So with that in mind, let's get started on this episode to find out what the working of miracles is, but it's not, if you may have that gift to some degree and why it's so important in the kingdom of God today. When most people think of miracles, it's usually more along the areas of someone's health, some kind of an instant or physical, emotional healing. I think there can be a broad range of things that can be considered a miracle. Before I go too deep into that discussion on miracles, let's take a quick look at a few definitions of miracles are. The American Heritage Dictionary defines a miracle as an event that appears inexplicable by the laws of nature, so it is held to be supernatural in origin or an act of God. Merriam-Webster's dictionary puts it this way: an extraordinary event manifesting a divine intervention in human affairs. An extremely outstanding or unusual thing or an accomplishment, a divinely natural phenomenon experienced humanly as a fulfillment of a spiritual law. GotQuestions.org has this to say about miracles. The biblical definition of a miracle would be something like this: an event that involves direct, powerful action of God, transcending the ordinary laws of nature, defying common expectations of behavior. Miracles are extraordinary occurrences that can only be attributed to the supernatural work of God and demonstrated by His involvement in human history. God employs miracles in the Bible to reveal Himself, His character, and His purposes to humans through phenomena that are not otherwise explainable. Miracles provide evidence of God's presence and power in the world, demonstrating His authority on behalf of His servants. A miracle can be performed directly by God or through a human agent. Other words used to describe miracles in the Bible are signs and wonders, typically used together, also powers and mighty works. Looking over these definitions, we can see there are a few common themes about miracles. They're supernatural in nature, that they're a result of an act or a working of God, that they go beyond human knowledge or ability. One thing I wanted to point out from that GotQuestions.org article, it made the statement of, a miracle may be performed directly through God or by a human agent. Without question, we know that God can do anything He wishes and He can perform miracles all by Himself without our help. But what about the last part of that statement, or through a human agent? I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but before we can discuss that, I think we need to clarify what we mean by the working of miracles. Is there a difference between miracles and the working of miracles? Are those just terms and different words or phrases that really mean the same thing? While doing research for this episode, I found there are varying opinions on what is meant by the working of miracles. Some think that the working of miracles indicates a different level of miracle. For example, in a sermon on the working of miracles from Pastor Nolan of Cornerstone Fellowship Church, Pastor Nolan indicated that the working of miracles refers to dunamis miracles or powerful miracles. The Greek word dunamis means strong or powerful, and it's where we get the English word dynamite from. In his sermon, Pastor Nolan goes on to give biblical examples of those powerful miracles that he mentioned. I'm going to give you the scriptures for those examples that he gave, along with a little hint for each. I would strongly encourage you to spend some time on your own reading through these scriptures, doing a little extra research to find out what makes them different from other miracles. There's two from the New Testament and two from the Old Testament. The first is 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 13 and 14, where he's talking about the Jordan River. Then in Exodus 15, 21 through 22, he's talking about the Red Sea. In the New Testament, he goes to the book of Acts, chapter 19, verses 11 and 12, about unusual miracles. And finally, in Romans chapter 1, about Jesus' resurrection. Without question, those are examples of big and powerful miracles or acts of God. I'm sure when you do some research on these verses, you'll be able to identify other types of miracles in the Bible and possibly something in your own life that may qualify as a miracle or even one of those powerful miracles. Another view I found on miracles was from Derek Prince in a short video titled Miracles Go Beyond Healing, where he talks about miracles, gives examples of them in the Bible and how they're released. He went on to say this about miracles. Miracles are often restorative or creative and go beyond healing. They are usually released or activated by a simple act of faith, and they're often visible or instantaneous. I'll provide a link to that video in the description of this episode so you can go watch it later and see some of the examples he gives on some of those creative or restorative miracles. He also talks about simple acts of faith activating different miracles. I have a confession to make. Until I started doing research on this episode, I thought of healing and miracles as pretty much the same thing. If you recall, in the general definitions of a miracle, it's a supernatural event or an act of God. So, by that definition, many cases healing can be a miracle. But I think miracles, or the working of miracles we're talking about, can go beyond that. What about today? Do we see those powerful miracles or healing miracles, or even those ones that go beyond healing today? I think we do, and I'll explain why and provide some examples later. Based on some of the criteria that Derek Prince laid out, I think I can say that my healing probably falls under that category of a powerful miracle, or possibly even something that goes beyond normal healing. For those of you not familiar with my story of healing, let me quickly give you the 30,000-foot view of what happened. For years, I had suffered from depression, anxiety, and other things. At one point, I was taking 4 to 6 medications a day to deal with those issues. Over time, I started to get worse, and my doctors had no real explanation for why, but they just kept trying new medications. During this time, I went to see Pastor Ray, my deliverance minister, about some other things. We started talking about the depression and the other issues I was suffering from at the time, and we went through a deliverance session focused on dealing primarily with the depression issue. When that session was over, I felt a little different, lighter, kind of like a weight was lifted off of me. It wasn't a major difference at the time, but I knew enough that something had changed. I distinctly remember, after several minutes sitting there and reflecting on what happened, asking Pastor Ray something along the lines of, "Now that my depression's gone, can I stop taking my medications?" Pastor Ray wisely responded, telling me not to stop taking any medications or change anything until I had a chance to talk to my doctor. I kind of half hesitantly agreed and went on with my life the next day. I did notice more of that lighter feeling, and things seemed to be becoming more different somehow in the days after. To my great surprise, I found myself getting high from my medications. While not a visible change for my healing, such as restoring a broken or missing limb, without question it was instant as I felt different within minutes after the session and more as each day passed. The source of my problems were immediately removed by dealing with the spiritual issues. I think I can also say that my simple act of faith that Derek Prince talked about was that I was so sure that my depression was gone, or that soon would be gone, I asked about stopping to take my medications. Not a major step of faith, but probably enough to activate that miracle and keep it going. That was over 12 years ago. I haven't had any depression, anger, anxiety, and no need for medications of any time for those kind of things. I also want to tell you about a similar event that happened within the last month or so before recording this episode. I'm sure there's many of you out there who think that healing or a miracle from God is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Nothing could be further from the truth. Our God is not a one-and-done kind of God. You don't just get that one miracle and then meet your lifetime quota. He's not just there for the one big thing that happens and leaves you on your own, or just shows up for the little things in life after that. For several months, I was scheduled to have a prayer session with 6-1 Ministries. They're an inner healing and deliverance prayer ministry. They do training and equipping people in areas of prayer, spiritual warfare, the believer's authority, spiritual gifts, and more. I'll leave a link to their ministry in the description of this episode so you can go check them out later. I found that those who are in ministry, and especially those taking on the enemy directly in some form or another, need to have a spiritual checkup from time to time. I think anyone who is sharing the truth of Christ or the truth about the enemy are targets of the enemy and need to be aware of his schemes and deceptions. You may need to ensure that the enemy hasn't slipped in somewhere unnoticed. About 6 to 8 weeks before I went to that session, I started having some knee pain, and over time it became more intense. I had a knee injury years ago, so I just assumed it was a reoccurrence of that injury. My doctors at the time said it was possible that you could have that injury flare up from time to time, so I just assumed that's what was the case. About a week and a half to 2 weeks before that session, I also had a Bell's palsy episode occur. By the time I had gotten to the session, I've been on some medications and it helped, but I was still having some of the droopiness in the sides of the face and my speech wasn't totally clear. I suspected that the prolonged pain from the knee and the stress that came with it is what triggered that Bell's palsy episode. Can I say for 100% sure that's what triggered it? No, but it sure seemed to be the case at the time as I've had to deal with that kind of thing before. About a week or so before that session started, I had to start wearing a knee brace to be able to walk. Without that brace, I couldn't walk very far for very long on my own. I was hobbling a little when I walked into that prayer session, but when I left, I was not wearing that knee brace and I walked out on my own fairly well. Through that prayer session, the minister was asking Jesus and the Holy Spirit for guidance to reveal anything that we needed to know about what was going on in my life. We discovered that I was dealing with a direct spiritual attack with the intention to stop me from doing what I was doing or to at least slow me down or hinder things. The ministers prayed to remove the enemy's attacks from me and my family and what I've been doing to help others. They also prayed specifically for the healing of the knee and the Bell's palsy. I can't say that I felt a total transformation or some kind of a major healing event, but I can say that I knew for sure that when they stopped praying that things had somehow changed. My simple act of faith in this case was to remove that knee brace before I stood up to walk. When I did, I was a little wobbly and unstable. The first few steps were still painful, but nothing like what it was before when I got there. After a few more steps, I was walking a little better. The ministers said they could also see that my face was not as droopy and as it was when I came in, and my speech was a little clearer. There's still some pain when I walk, and the effects of the Bell's palsy are still a little noticeable at times. The pain is not from the knee itself, but from the sore and tender leg muscles because I was not able to walk normally for so long. Less than a week after being prayed over, I actually found myself running up some stairs for a few steps. A remarkable improvement given that it was very hard to get up and down those steps just a few days before. Just as with that first healing I talked about, the source of my problems were removed, but it's taking some time for my body to come back in line and fully recover on its own. It was without question an act of God or a miracle based on those definitions we saw earlier. I have a serious word of caution for those of you about simple acts of faith. Don't confuse a simple act of faith with a stupid act of faith. What do I mean by that? In the first example, I explained that my simple act of faith was to ask Pastor Ray if I could stop taking my medications because I was sure my depression and other things were gone. That soon turned into a stupid act of faith. After a few weeks of that strange or getting high feeling from my medications, I rationalized that God must have healed me so I can stop taking those medications, and probably one of the dumbest things I've ever done. After a week or so of stopping those medications, I started having some serious and potentially dangerous reactions. I had to get back on those medications, visit with my doctors, and they slowly removed me over those medications over about a 4 to 6 month period. In my second example of a simple act of faith, that was to remove the knee brace I was wearing before standing up and walking out. I even verbally stated, "This is my act of faith," before removing that knee brace because I knew for sure that God had changed things. You must take caution in what you do for your simple act of faith. You should never stop taking any kind of medication or using some medical device that a doctor's prescribed. Make sure you always do those things under the direction of your doctor, as many medications need to be tapered off and not just stop cold turkey. Perhaps your simple act of faith is to tell others what happened or contact your doctor and explain why you think it's possible you don't need those medications or using those medical devices, especially if you find yourself in a situation like I did where my medications were no longer effective for their intended purpose. You must take caution in how you present this information to a doctor. A simple, "I had someone pray over me and I don't need this medication anymore," may end up having the doctor put you on more medications, possibly even seeing a mental health specialist. Not every doctor understands faith, and many of them don't believe there's a God. They may think there's something wrong with you if you believe that you were healed by an imaginary God. Have you possibly missed out on some kind of a miracle that you were asking for because you didn't fully embrace a simple act of faith? I started off this section asking, is there a difference between miracles and the working of miracles? You heard a little bit from Pastor Nolan and Derek Prince on the phrase working of miracles has a distinction of being big or powerful miracles, or that miracles have characteristics that go just beyond healing. I asked this question to David Guzik if the working of miracles had some special meaning, or does it just mean miracles? If you're not familiar with David's work, he does a weekly YouTube Bible question and answer time. He's a pastor, author, conference speaker, and the founder of Enduring Word Ministries. There you'll find a lot of great biblical resources along with a Bible commentary that I rely on heavily when doing research for this podcast. Here's the response I got from David on that question of, does the working of miracles have a special meaning, or does it just mean miracles in general?
Spirit Warrior, I just want you to know, I think you're overthinking this one. I don't think there's really any substantial difference between saying the miracles and the working of miracles. The phrase the working of miracles has more of an implication of the use of a human instrument. Um, but really, that can also be implied just in saying the gift of miracles. So, in this particular sense, at least as far as I can immediately tell, my tendency would think you're just kind of overthinking this and thinking that there's some great significance in the phrase working of miracles, where I think it's just pretty much the same as saying the doing of miracles, the practicing or the carrying out of the miraculous.
As you can see, David has a little different take on the working of miracles. This is kind of where I was when I started doing my research, and honestly, I can see both sides of this question, so I'm not 100% sure what my position is right now. No matter which side of the equation you fall on, I think the bigger thing is to not lose sight that some miracles are bigger or more powerful than others, at least from man's perspective. But at the end of the day, miracles are all to give God honor, glory, and praise and to bring people to Him. Sometimes miracles are done by God alone with no human intervention, and sometimes He uses His people to do those miracles. Let's not forget what we're told in Ephesians 2:10. For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God had prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. For some, those good works may be that God is allowing us to be part of performing miracles and maybe to be the ones to release that simple act of faith that helps miracles for themselves or others. Why don't we see those kinds of miracles today that we see in the Bible, including those creative or restorative miracles, such as giving sight to a person who was born blind, to see someone walk who's never walked from birth, just get up and walk at the name of Jesus? What about growing back a missing limbs, correcting serious physical injuries, healing people's horrible diseases that we have today that may have been like leprosy in the Bible, or maybe even seeing people raised from the dead, just like Lazarus? Now, with that said, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there thinking something along the lines of, I've never experienced that kind of a miracle. No one in my family's ever experienced that kind of a miracle. And I really don't know anyone personally who's ever experienced anything like that. I suspect most of you are thinking of those things live in places that may fall under that category that Jesus ran into in Matthew 13:58, where he had gone back to his own country and couldn't perform miracles. Let's read about what happened there. Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished those parables, that he departed from there. When he had come to his own country, he taught them in their synagogues, so that they were astonished and said, where did this man get his wisdom and these mighty works? Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Where did these men get all these great things? So they were offended by him, but Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and his house. Now, Jesus did not do mighty works there because of their unbelief. Jesus went back to the country where he lived and grew up, and he was teaching in their synagogues, and people couldn't believe that one of their own could be so full of wisdom and doing mighty works. He must have done some miracles there, because verse 58 says he did not do many mighty works there. The people there couldn't buy the fact that one of their own was running around doing all these things. After all, this was Mary's boy, and the people knew everyone in their family, their flaws, their shortcomings, and that they were just like everyone else and couldn't understand or believe the things that Jesus was doing or who he said he was. They were even offended by Jesus, as we saw in verse 57. David Guzik, in his Enduring Word Bible commentary, has this to say about verse 58. It is truly remarkable that Jesus was in some manner limited by their unbelief. As long as God chooses to work in concert with human agency, developing our ability to partner with Him, our unbelief may hinder the work of God. Is it possible that you can't reach those who are closest to you and bring them to Christ for that very reason? Those who are closest to you know your flaws, your shortcomings, your history, and they may think that you believe you're better than them because you don't do the same things you used to do and that they may be still trying to get you to do. I'm convinced when you understand Matthew 6:6 and how the enemy operates, that you can be way more effective from them from your prayer closet without ever speaking a word to them about God, the Bible, and spiritual things. It's a matter of just living out your faith in front of them. You don't have to hide your faith, but you don't flaunt it out in front of them either. That we need to be loving to our families, and sometimes that's very hard to do when they don't believe the same way we do or don't like the fact that you become a believer. Yes, you need to talk to them about God and spiritual things when opportunities arise, but don't force that opportunity to happen. Look for those opportunities and use some discernment. Ask that quick, silent prayer to God to give you wisdom and knowledge to know what to say when that happens, just like Nehemiah did in Nehemiah chapter 2 when the king asked him why he seemed so sad. You may be surprised to find that God will say no even when the opportunity looks good to you. The Holy Spirit knows way more about what's in their heart and their mind at the moment and how they may respond if you say something to them. So follow the guidance of the Holy Spirit and wait for that right opportunity. If you find yourself in a situation like this with your loved ones, go back and listen to episodes 9 and 10, parts 1 and 2. Those episodes may help you to understand how to better fight for those around you and maybe begin to see some of those miracles, large and small, take place for them and yourself. Earlier, I said that I'm sure most people are thinking that they've never experienced or seen these kinds of miracles because they fall under that category that Jesus ran into when he'd gone back to his own country. In the United States and probably most Western nations, we've moved so far away from the truth of God and his word, most people don't believe there is a God, let alone that God will do those miracles that we've been talking about. Many people have been lied to and deceived by the enemy to believe everything but the truth. I have to wonder if we're not seeing those things in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 3 that Paul told Timothy. Now, the Spirit expressly says in the latter times that some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from foods which God had created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. People or the culture as a whole accepting deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons may very well explain why there's no belief in miracles, because people are searching for so many things in so many places for help and healing and not turning to or believing in the one true God. I've experienced miracles firsthand as I've talked about them earlier. I have been blessed to pray along with others and to see people that I've never met or even know their names in some cases experience miraculous healings. So, yes, I know for a fact that miracles happen today. I think the problem is that the enemy has been hiding in plain sight in our country and that no one takes spiritual warfare real or doesn't care about it. Take a look at other countries in the world, and especially some parts of Africa, and you'll see all kinds of spiritual warfare taking place in the open, including forms of witchcraft, occult practices, and to some degree, those lying signs and wonders that appear to be miracles that people will accept openly and embrace the enemy. Do a little research and you can find story after story that occurs today of godly missionaries that go into those areas of the world, and you will hear them talk about miracles, and many of them being powerful miracles that Pastor Nolan and Derek Prince talked about. You'll hear stories of limbs growing back and people being brought back from the dead. I've known someone who's lived in one of those countries, and they told me without question spiritual warfare is in the open and evident to most people. They also told me that they had saw and heard the sounds of a crippled leg being restored back to normal for a close family member. Why do they see miracles and most of us don't? The enemy is not hiding in those places like he does here. The people see the enemy at work and they know about the supernatural. So when a true man of God comes to them, they are ready to receive the miracles of God because they know there is something bigger out there. I've discussed the different positions out there on what makes a miracle, from just about anything supernatural in nature that can't be explained from human knowledge, experience, or science, to being more than just healing with that restorative or creative function that makes things new. And lastly, the idea of a miracle to be big or powerful act of God. I think all of these categories can apply, and that some miracles are bigger than others by what they accomplish, and that miracles can often take all kinds of forms, whether that's healing from a disease, an injury, finances, relationships, or even moving mountains in your life, as we talked about in episode 17. The thing to understand is that you may be receiving a miracle from God, but don't recognize it as such, or that it came from God because it was not powerful, instant, completely visible, or obvious. Be sure when you're asking God for something to look for those smaller miracles and to give him all honor, glory, and praise when you do. I think that will change your life, and you may even begin to see more miracles in the future for yourself and those around you. Before closing out this episode, can't have a discussion about miracles without addressing the demons in the room. It is very possible for those involved in occult practices, including witchcraft, psychics, mediums, to perform miracles with the help of familiar spirits and to produce some kind of lying signs and wonders that are orchestrated by demons behind the scenes. This is done to get people to follow them and turn away from the one true God. Think about it. If one of the enemy's goals is to move you away from God, how hard would it be for that enemy to stage events or remove some major issue in your life that he caused just at the right time. That would make it look like a miracle took place, or maybe that the enemy just simply gave you something you wanted, probably not what you needed, to make you turn your back on God, whether you're a Christian or not. I think in many cases, demons don't care so much that they're hurting you, but how much it hurts God when his children, or those who's been drawn to himself, turn away and follow the enemy. Some who will be lost all through eternity, which I think hurts God's heart more than anything else. And the enemy wants to do everything he can to hurt God every chance he can. Yes, there's many demons out there who hate you because of whose you are, and they know that they've lost their opportunity to be with God. They want to hurt or inflict pain on you any way they can. But overall, I think most of them hate God a lot more than they hate us. And those of you who are parents know that harming your children is way more painful than inflicting pain on you directly. So, what is a familiar spirit? Carm.org has this to say. A familiar spirit is a demon that is summoned by a medium with the intention of that spirit summoned to obey his or her commands. Often, familiar spirits are believed to be spirits of people who have died. However, biblically, this is not true. Such appearances are in actuality enemy forces imitating people in order to deceive. The enemy knows more than we do about the things in the world. He can easily predict what may happen in the future, and in many cases uses familiar spirits to make things happen or share information with other familiar spirits to coordinate events to make it look like your involvement in the occult led you to some truth about some issue you were dealing with. The enemy may also be in a position to give you those things that you desire, such as money, power, success, or provide you with whatever you think will make you happy in life. You may also hear the term monitoring spirit. A monitoring spirit is similar to a familiar spirit. Based on my research, I found that they tend to do more information gathering on people in order to prevent them from receiving blessings and fulfilling their divine destiny. Maybe sharing that information with other spirits or people, or just using that to cause things to happen or discourage you and harm your faith. Now, familiar spirits and monitoring spirits know your areas of weakness, your fears, your desires, who you love, whose opinion you respect the most in life, and just about everything about you better than you do. I want to give you an example of how familiar spirits may operate behind the scenes and make things happen based on a radio interview that I heard years ago. A little disclaimer here. I was not able to find the specific interview on video or in written form, so I'm sharing this information as best I can recall what I heard on that interview at the time. It really stuck with me over the years, so I'm confident what I'm sharing you is accurate. A woman was being interviewed on the radio telling her story of why she left her Christian faith for something else in the occult. She grew up in a Christian home and was praying to God about getting married. She was dating someone at the time and asking God to show her if he was the right person that she should be with. God didn't answer her right away, so after a period of time without hearing from God the way she wanted or expected him to answer, she started to seek out answers in other places. She went to a psychic to see if she could get answers that way. After some time working with a psychic, she was told that her boyfriend was with someone else and where they would be on a given day. The psychic claimed that her spirits had told her this information. She went to where the psychic said they would be and did find him with someone else. The woman being interviewed said she turned to the occult and away from God after that because she got the answers she needed from the psychic and thinks the psychic did her a favor by showing her what the boyfriend was doing. And there may be some truth in that. Sometimes the enemy will do good things or show you those miracles to get you to follow him. In this case, God didn't answer her in the way and the time she expected, but the enemy did. If we're honestly seeking answers from God, he will respond. It will be in his time and in his way. And sometimes when it doesn't happen in our timing, many of us will start to seek answers in other places. I can't tell you why God didn't provide the answers the way she was looking for. Maybe he did show her at some point that the boyfriend was not the right person for her, but like so many of us, she may have only been open to hearing the answers from God that she wanted to hear and was ignoring the other things that God was telling her. I think this could be a case of familiar spirits associated with a woman, the boyfriend, and the psychic all communicating together to tell the woman the very thing that caused her to walk away from God. Can I be 100% sure of this? No. But given the events of what happened and understanding a little bit how the enemy operates, I can say it's highly likely that the events or something close to it took place behind the scenes, with those familiar spirits working together to achieve the goal of destroying someone's faith or preventing them and those around them from ever coming to faith in the first place. The enemy will always come after those the hardest that have the most potential for God and that can be a threat to his kingdom in the future. The enemy will do whatever he can to stop that threat. The big thing to remember is that a miracle that points to God, gives him all honor, glory, and praise for the events that happen, is probably from God. Any miracle that draws attention to a person, that draws people away from God and into other things, is probably a deception of the enemy designed to push people away from that one true God. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Unleashing Spirit Warriors, and now you have a better understanding of what miracles are, what the working of miracles means, and perhaps a little more faith and confidence that you can be used to perform some of those miracles we talked about for others and to show them that God is real and really does care for them. Be sure to join me on the next episode where I'll be taking a little break from the gifts of the Spirit, and we'll be talking about something that all Spirit Warriors need to be aware of, or they may find themselves losing ground to the enemy. Again, be sure to like, share, and leave a comment to let me know what you think about this new format, good, bad, or indifferent. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, please be sure to do so to receive notifications when new episodes are released and to help you win against the true enemy. Till next time, keep unleashing other Spirit Warriors, teach others to do the same, and to help them gain their spiritual freedom.